It was late in the afternoon when I first met Mia Hollow. She sat quietly at the table, her hands resting on the wood, palms down, as if trying to ground herself. There was something in her eyes, a weight, a story too heavy to carry alone. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft yet deliberate, the kind of voice that made you lean in, knowing each word carried meaning. "I haven't told many people this," she began, glancing out the window at the fading light. "But I think it's time. People need to hear it, even if it's hard." I nodded, sensing the significance of what she was about to share. She took a deep breath, her shoulders rising and falling as she steadied herself. If you believe in God and near-death experiences, subscribe to Life at NDE today. Discover inspiring messages from God through powerful near-death stories that bring hope and understanding. Hit subscribe now and join us in spreading the light of faith. My name is Mia Hollow. I'm a nurse in Bozeman, Montana, and I've spent most of my life here, living quietly, working hard, and tending to my little farm on the side. I never thought I'd have a story worth telling, much less one that would change my life so completely. But on November 15th, 2024, everything I thought I knew about myself, about the world, was shattered. It was one of those cold, dry mornings that Montana is known for in November. I had woken up early, as usual, to tend to the animals before my shift at the clinic. The barn was quiet except for the shuffling of hooves and the occasional snort from the cows. Among them was Orion, a bull with a temper as stubborn as his size. I'd dealt with him for years and thought I knew his moods. But that morning was different. I was tossing hay into his pen when, without warning, he turned and lashed out. His hoof struck me square in the chest, and it felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. The pain was immediate and sharp, but worse was the feeling of being utterly powerless. My knees gave out, and I crumpled to the ground, my vision blurring as the world tilted around me. The last thing I remember was the sound of Orion's hooves retreating, the barn fading into silence, and a deep, oppressive blackness closing in. When I woke, it wasn't to the sound of concerned voices or the sterile beeping of hospital machines. Instead, I found myself enveloped in absolute darkness. It wasn't like closing your eyes or turning off the lights. This darkness had weight. It pressed against me from all sides, heavy and suffocating, like being buried alive. I tried to move, but I couldn't feel the ground beneath me. I couldn't tell if I was standing, sitting, or floating. My hands reached for something, anything, but there was only emptiness. I called out, my voice trembling in the void, but no sound came back. It was as though the darkness swallowed everything, even my breath. Time didn't exist in that place. It could have been minutes or hours or days, I had no way of knowing. The only constant was the growing dread inside me, a feeling that something was there, watching, waiting. Then, as suddenly as the silence had consumed me, it shattered. Screams erupted around me, distant at first, like faint whispers carried on the wind. They grew louder and closer until they became a deafening cacophony. Voices, each filled with anguish and fury, swirled through the darkness, overwhelming me. I couldn't understand their words, but I could feel their torment, their anger. It was as if the weight of their suffering was pressing into my very soul. And then the flames appeared. They started as small flickers, tiny bursts of light that barely pierced the darkness. But they grew quickly, transforming into an inferno that illuminated the space around me. The fire wasn't like anything I'd ever seen. It didn't just burn. It demanded attention, pulling my gaze with a force I couldn't resist. Through the flames, I began to see shapes. At first, they were indistinct, mere shadows writhing in the fire. But as the flames rose higher, the shapes became clearer. Figures emerged, their bodies grotesquely twisted and stretched in ways that defied nature. Their faces bore a faint resemblance to humans, but their eyes were hollow, their mouths frozen in eternal screams. One of them stepped closer, and I saw its hands. They were nothing but charred skeletons, blackened and brittle like coal. Its movements were slow and deliberate, each step accompanied by a low, haunting hum that resonated in my chest. The closer it came, the more I felt like the air was being pulled from my lungs. "You belong here," it said. Its voice was both a whisper and a scream, echoing through the void and reverberating in my mind. "Your heart was dark." The word struck me like a physical blow. I stumbled backward, but there was nowhere to go. The darkness surrounded me, and the flames seemed to close in. More figures emerged from the fire, their hollow eyes fixed on me. Each one seemed to carry a piece of my reflection, as though they were fragments of myself I didn't want to see. The first figure stepped closer still, and its features began to shift. Its face morphed and twisted until it became unmistakably mine. It stared at me with a gaze so piercing it felt as though it could see every secret, every sin, every hidden thought I'd ever had. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Its hollow eyes held me captive. The flames grew higher, and I saw warped structures emerging in the firelight, shattered towers, broken walls, chains hanging from the void above. The clanging of those chains echoed through the space, each sound a physical blow that struck fear deep into my core. And then the ground beneath me split open. A massive chasm yawned at my feet, its depths glowing with an eerie light. But this light wasn't comforting, it was filled with echoes, the cries of lost souls embedded within it. As I stared into the chasm, I felt something pull at me, drawing me toward the edge. The light acted like a mirror, reflecting every mistake, every fear, every sin I had buried deep inside myself. A scream tore through the air, closer than any I had heard before. I turned, my heart pounding, and saw a figure crawling toward me. Its body was unrecognizable, writhing in agony with every movement. Flames erupted from its hands each time they struck the ground, and its voice, low and broken, carried a single phrase: "There is no escape." Mia's voice wavered as she finished recounting this part of her story. She looked at me with eyes that carried both pain and determination. "That was only the beginning," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What came next, that's what truly changed me." Mia Hollow's hands trembled slightly as she recounted her experience. Her voice, which had been steady up to this point, softened as she began to describe the next part of her journey. The figure crawling toward me was unlike anything I had ever seen. Its body was twisted and broken, flames licking at its charred skin with every movement. Its empty eyes locked onto mine, and I felt an overwhelming sense of despair. It whispered again, its voice like a breeze carrying embers, "There is no escape." I wanted to run, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. My breath came in shallow gasps, and the heat pressed against my skin like a physical weight. The chasm in front of me glowed brighter, and the cries from within it grew louder. It wasn't just the sound of anguish, it was the echo of truths I had long buried. Truths I didn't want to face. The ground beneath me shifted, and I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. The grotesque figure stopped its advance, but its gaze never left me. Then, as if summoned by some unseen force, other figures began to emerge from the flames. They were more distinct now, their forms almost human but distorted in ways that made my stomach churn. I realized with a jolt that I recognized them. Each one was someone from my past. A neighbor, a coworker, a classmate, people whose faces I had long since forgotten, but whose presence now burned into my memory. They didn't speak, but their hollow eyes bore into me, accusing without words. The air around me felt heavy with their unspoken pain. The visions began then, vivid and inescapable. The first was from my childhood, back when I was no more than 8 or 9 years old. A new family had moved into the neighborhood different from us, with darker skin and unfamiliar customs. I didn't know much about them, but that didn't stop me from joining the other kids in ostracizing them. I threw rocks at their fence, played cruel pranks, and whispered lies that spread like wildfire. I saw the pain in their faces, especially in the mother's tired eyes as she tried to shield her children from our cruelty. I told myself at the time it was just kids being kids. But now, standing in this place, I felt the weight of every cruel word, every act of malice. The vision shifted, and I was older. In high school, I sat in a crowded cafeteria, surrounded by friends. A girl from a different background, a transfer student, sat alone at a table nearby. Someone made a joke at her expense, and I joined in, laughing louder than anyone else. I remembered the way she glanced at us, her face flushed with embarrassment, before gathering her things and leaving. At the time, I had felt a fleeting pang of guilt, but I had buried it quickly, telling myself it wasn't my problem. Now, I felt that guilt rise to the surface, sharp and unrelenting. I saw the tears she had shed in private, the sense of isolation I had contributed to, and I wanted to scream at my younger self to stop. The visions came faster now, each one hitting harder than the last. I saw patients I had treated during my nursing career, moments when I had let prejudice guide my actions. One patient in particular stood out, a man who had come in for a routine checkup. He spoke with a heavy accent, and I remembered rolling my eyes when he struggled to explain his symptoms. I had dismissed him as a burden, a waste of my time. But now I saw the worry in his eyes, the way he had looked at me for reassurance and received none. Each memory was more than just an image, it was a feeling. I felt the pain I had caused, the weight of the harm I had done. Even when I thought my actions were insignificant, the darkness pressed against me, whispering, "Your heart was dark." A new figure appeared, stepping out of the flames. Its form was shadowy and spectral, but its eyes burned with an intensity that made me want to look away. It towered over me, its voice cold and firm. "Did you see their pain, Mia?" it asked. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. With every glance, every laugh, every word, "You pushed them further away," the figure continued. "What have you brought into this world?" I wanted to protest, to explain that I hadn't meant to hurt anyone, that I was just doing what everyone else did. But the excuses died on my lips. Deep down, I knew the truth. I had ignored the pain of others because it was easier. I had chosen apathy over empathy, comfort over courage. The figure gestured, and another scene appeared before me. I was in my 20s, working my first nursing job. A coworker named Marcus had just been hired, a young man full of enthusiasm and kindness. But he was different, and that difference made him a target. I remembered the jokes my colleagues made behind his back, the way they excluded him from conversations. And I remembered how I had joined in, laughing at his expense, eager to fit in. Now, as I watched the scene unfold, I saw Marcus's face. I saw the hurt he tried to hide, the way his smile faltered when he thought no one was looking. The shadowy figure's voice echoed in my mind, "Your words struck like stones. Your silence poisoned the world around you." Tears streamed down my face as I dropped to my knees. "I didn't know," I whispered. "I didn't know it mattered." "You knew," the figure replied. "You always knew." The flames surged, and chains began to appear around me. They were cold and heavy, each one wrapping tightly around my wrists and ankles. I tried to move, but the weight was unbearable. Each chain carried a memory, a moment of harm I had caused, jokes I had made, opportunities for kindness I had ignored, times when I had chosen judgment over compassion. The chains weren't just physical, they were a reflection of the person I had allowed myself to become. Through the flames, Marcus's face appeared again. His eyes were filled with tears, a mixture of anger and disappointment. "Why, Mia?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Why did you make me live in a world you taught me to hate?" I wanted to answer, to apologize, but the chains held me down, and my voice failed me. The shadowy figure loomed closer, its voice like thunder. "You've built your own hell, Mia," it said, "and only true repentance can break it." But repentance isn't just a feeling, will it lead to change? As the vision faded, I was left kneeling in the flames, my chains growing heavier with every passing moment. I knew then that I couldn't escape this place, this reckoning, until I faced the full weight of my sins. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a tiny spark of hope began to flicker. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me moving forward. Mia Hollow paused for a moment, her hands trembling as she recalled the weight of the chains. Her voice, quieter now, carried a raw vulnerability that made it impossible to look away as she continued her story. I knelt there in the flames, the chains pulling me down, my body trembling under their weight. Each link represented a moment I wanted to forget but could no longer ignore. I wanted to fight them, to tear them away. But they weren't just physical, they were the embodiment of my choices, my actions, and the harm I had caused. The only way out, I realized, was through. The shadowy figure loomed over me, its burning eyes fixed on mine. "You've seen the weight of your actions," it said, its voice deep and resonant. "Now, look at the reflection of your heart." Before I could speak, a mirror appeared in front of me, rising from the ground like a shard of glass pulled from the flames. It shimmered with an unnatural light, its surface rippling like water. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. The mirror drew me in, showing me a face I barely recognized. It was me, but not the person I thought I was. My reflection was darkened, the features twisted and hollow. My eyes, lifeless and cold, stared back at me, accusing me without words. It was a version of myself stripped of pretense, a reflection of who I had been at my worst. I reached out to touch the mirror, but the surface rippled, sending waves of pain through my chest. "This is your heart," the figure said, stepping closer. "Every choice, every word, every silence has shaped it. Do you see it now?" I didn't know. I stammered, tears streaming down my face. "I didn't realize." "You knew," the figure interrupted, its voice cutting through my excuses. "You always knew. And you chose to look away." The reflection began to change. Memories played out across the mirror's surface, each one clearer and more vivid than the last. I saw the family from my childhood, their tired faces etched with pain as they tried to shield their children from our cruelty. I saw the girl in the cafeteria, her shoulders hunched as she fled the room. I saw Marcus, his forced smile faltering as he turned away from the laughter that was never meant for him. The images blurred together, faster and faster, until I couldn't tell one from the next. The weight of it all crushed me, and I collapsed to the ground, sobbing. Then, through the chaos, a voice broke through. It wasn't loud or commanding, it was soft, steady, and achingly familiar. "Mia," it said, "is this who you want to be?" I lifted my head and saw another figure stepping forward. It was brighter than the shadows, its form less defined but radiating warmth. I couldn't make out its face, but I felt its presence deep in my chest, like a faint heartbeat. It knelt in front of me, its light washing over the chains, making them glow faintly. "You've carried these chains for too long," the figure said. "But carrying them isn't enough. What will you do with the weight of your guilt?" "I don't know," I whispered. "I don't know how to make it right." "Then start with this," the figure said. "Say the words you've never said." I knew what it meant, but the words caught in my throat. The chains tightened, the weight pressing into my chest. But I forced them out, one painful syllable at a time. "Forgive me," I said, my voice cracking. "Please, forgive me." As soon as the words left my mouth, something shifted. The chains didn't fall away completely, but they loosened, just enough for me to breathe. The flames around me flickered, dimming slightly, and the oppressive heat eased. "Forgiveness is the first step," the figure said. "But forgiveness without change is empty. Will you change?" "Mia? I don't know how," I admitted, my voice trembling. "I don't know where to start." "Start with the truth," it replied. "The truth of who you've been and the truth of who you want to be." The figure placed a hand on my shoulder, and warmth flooded through me. It wasn't the searing heat of the flames, it was a gentle, soothing warmth that filled the cracks in my soul. The chains around my wrists and ankles grew lighter, and I felt the smallest glimmer of hope. The shadowy figure returned, its burning eyes watching me with a quiet intensity. "This is your reckoning, Mia," it said. "But it's not the end. What you do next will determine everything." The mirror faded, the chains dissolved, and the flames receded. I found myself standing again, the oppressive darkness lifting slightly. The ground beneath me was still uneven, and the air was still heavy. But for the first time, I felt like I could move forward. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stop now. Each step felt like a choice, a declaration that I wouldn't let the weight of my past define me. The whispers in the darkness grew softer, the shadows less menacing, and though I couldn't see what lay ahead, I kept walking. Mia's voice wavered as she finished describing this part of her journey. She looked at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "That moment changed everything," she said. "But the road ahead wasn't easy. It was just the beginning." Mia Hollow paused, her hands clasped together tightly, as if holding on to a memory too fragile to release. Her voice softened when she spoke again, but her words carried the weight of what she had endured. I kept walking, even though every step felt heavier than the last. The flames receded into the distance, and the darkness around me shifted. It wasn't as suffocating now, but it still lingered, pressing at the edges of my vision. The air was thick, and every breath felt like a struggle, as if the atmosphere itself was testing my resolve. Ahead, a faint light appeared, not the fiery red of the inferno I had left, but a softer, steadier glow. I moved toward it, my feet dragging as though the remnants of the chains still clung to me. The path beneath me began to change, becoming smoother, almost reflective. It was like walking on glass. But the surface showed no reflection of me, only the faint outlines of the darkness I carried within. The light grew stronger as I approached, and I saw what was casting it, a figure, radiant and still, standing at the center of an open space. Its light was unlike anything I'd ever seen, gentle, yet piercing. It wasn't just illuminating the space around me, it was piercing through me, exposing everything I had tried to hide. "Come closer," the figure said. Its voice wasn't commanding or harsh. It was calm, steady, and filled with an undeniable presence. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. Every instinct told me to turn back, to retreat into the darkness. But something stronger, something deeper urged me forward. I took a tentative step, then another, until I was standing before the figure. As I looked at it, I realized I couldn't fully discern its features. It was human-like, but its face was obscured by light, its edges blurred as if it were made of pure energy. Yet, despite its lack of distinct features, I felt it looking at me, truly seeing me in a way no one else ever had. "Mia," it said, my name carrying a weight that sent shivers down my spine. "Do you understand why you are here?" Tears welled up in my eyes as I shook my head. I don't know why. I don't know how I got here." "You are here because of the choices you've made," the figure said. Its tone wasn't accusatory or condemning, it was simply factual, like a teacher explaining a difficult truth. Every thought, every word, every action has shaped the path that brought you here. The memories I had seen earlier came rushing back, the family I had ostracized, the girl in the cafeteria, Marcus and his quiet pain. Each one hit me like a wave, and I collapsed to my knees, sobbing. "I didn't mean to hurt them," I said, my voice breaking. "I didn't realize." "You knew," the figure interrupted, not harshly but firmly. "You knew, Mia. Deep down, you always knew. But you chose to look away, to justify, to ignore." I couldn't argue. Every excuse I had once clung to felt hollow now, stripped away by the clarity of the figure's presence. "I'm sorry," I whispered. I'm so sorry. Sorry is the beginning, the figure said, stepping closer. But it is not the end. True repentance is more than words. It is a transformation, a turning away from who you were and a commitment to who you can become. The figure extended a hand. And as it did, the ground beneath us began to change. The reflective surface became a pool, shimmering with light. I looked down and saw my reflection again. But it wasn't the twisted, hollow version I had seen before. It was me, tired, broken, but real. My eyes, though filled with tears, held a glimmer of something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Step forward, the figure said. Look into the water and see what lies beneath. I hesitated, fear clawing at my chest. What if I don't like what I see? You already know what is there, it replied. But facing it is the only way to move forward. I took a deep breath and stepped closer to the pool. The surface rippled as I knelt beside it, my reflection shifting and changing. Images began to appear in the water, memories I hadn't seen before. Moments I had buried so deeply I had almost forgotten them. I saw myself as a child, standing in the barn with my father. He was teaching me how to care for the animals. His voice patient and kind. You have to be gentle, he had said, placing my small hands on the calf's head. They don't understand words, but they understand kindness. The memory shifted, and I saw myself years later, standing in the same barn. But my father was gone. The warmth and gentleness he had instilled in me had been replaced by something colder: bitterness, anger, and a hardened shell I had built to protect myself. I realized then how far I had strayed from the person he had tried to raise me to be. The water rippled again, showing another memory. It was Marcus. Years ago, standing in the break room at the clinic. He was smiling, holding out a cup of coffee for me. But I had brushed past him, too preoccupied to notice. The memory played out like a film, showing the small moments I had dismissed, the opportunities for connection and kindness I had ignored. Tears streamed down my face as I pulled away from the pool. I've wasted so much time, I said, my voice trembling. I've hurt so many people. How can I ever make it right? The figure knelt beside me, its light surrounding me like a warm embrace. By choosing to change, it said. By turning your pain into compassion, your regret into action. The past cannot be undone, but it can guide you toward a better future.